Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host, Korey Gunz, along with wrestling expert Tom Colohue. And Tom, I thought it was going to be a slow week this week when we were setting up for the podcast, and man, was I wrong.
Never a slow week in wrestling, I tell you that. Anytime there's a slow week, either someone like a chief operating officer is fired or a new wrestling company gets set up, I sometimes think that I'm going to get a good night's sleep, and then they just throw random pay-per-views out at like 1 o'clock in the morning. It's wrestling. It never ends. It never ends.
Well, speaking of random, I know it's been about a week since Super Showdown, but I feel it's only appropriate that we still start the show off talking about the Fiend versus Goldberg. It's still the talk of the town, on online and in social media when you talk about the WWE right now, and as we gear up to our road to WrestleMania. Everyone knows by now, Super Showdown, Fiend versus Goldberg. Goldberg walks away with the championship. He defeats the Fiend, and not only defeats him, but defeats him pretty handedly. It was really your typical Goldberg match. Fiend gets in the mandible claw and gets in some offense, but it's a couple spears, a jackhammer, if that's what you want to call it. Looked more like a suplex to me, but I guess we'll let it slide and call it a jackhammer. 1, 2, 3, and Goldberg is the new Universal Champion. Let's start with, right after the show, you even put a tweet out that said that from all of your sources that the only person in the company that thought this was a good idea was Vince McMahon. And as we all know, really, when it comes down to it, his is the only opinion that really matters. So if Vince McMahon wants Goldberg as his champion heading into WrestleMania, that's what he's going to get. Can you tell us, though, why, if it was in fact that this was a Vince McMahon call, what would have persuaded Vince McMahon to think that this was the right move to make heading into WrestleMania, and especially with all the build-up that the character had up to this point?
I've said in this podcast quite a lot, and the plan for so long, I'm talking months upon months here, was the Fiend versus Roman Reigns. That's where they were headed. That's why the Fiend was moved to SmackDown. And yet, as they started to run low on faces, you start to think to yourself, okay, there's only really two people left for him to face. He's either going up against Braun Strowman or he's going up against Roman Reigns. It must be one of those two. Lo and behold, they've now added two faces from the past in at the top at SmackDown. And if they think Goldberg's going to be a face after what happened, they have got another thing coming. It's like the next evolution of go away heat in this regard. And it's no fault of Goldberg's. He's come back to do a job, just the same way that Bray Wyatt was told to do a job. The tweet I put out, someone did tell me in the morning when I woke up the next day, I had a message that simply said, the only person who thought this was a good idea was Vince McMahon. Now, you can say that's the opinion of one person, because ultimately it may be in that regard, but that's the opinion of a person who is involved in decision-making in the WWE. And they firmly believed it. They backed it up, So is it something that would happen on Raw, where Paul Heyman is in position as the executive director and he, let's say, gets away with a lot more? When it comes to the debates, Pritchard and Heyman, they will put their shows forward, and Heyman is always perceived to get away with a lot more and get more of what he wants. Is it something that would work there? I'm not sure. I'm really not. And when it comes to that, you've got your legends. I know Undertaker seems to be involved in Raw at the moment, but they needed Goldberg and John Cena for the top two matches in SmackDown. How weak does that SmackDown card have to be at that level? I can't tell you much about the thought process. The Fiend was so hot. From the day after last year's WrestleMania, the Fiend started doing those vignettes with Mercy the Buzzard. Everyone was talking about it. Then he won the championship, and because of what happened at Hell in a Cell, everyone was still talking about it. Everyone enjoyed the Bryan feud. Everyone kind of enjoyed the Miz feud. Then another Bryan feud happened. He started to lose momentum. I wonder how much of this is down to other people simply being pushed harder, to a point where people, I feel, started to forget The Fiend a little bit. He faded into the background a little. His feuds were getting a bit repetitive, his matches were getting a bit repetitive, and suddenly people were caring a lot more about Rhea Ripley, about Drew McIntyre. The Fiend versus Roman Reigns was the sort of the first option for the main event of WrestleMania. But when it came to it, I put something out about Paul Heyman wanting Drew McIntyre against Brock Lesnar to be the main event, but Vince McMahon still wanting The Fiend to be in the main event. And from what I can tell, nobody cared about The Fiend anymore. So I have a lot of questions to ask about how fan-driven this may be, but there does still seem to be a plan, even if that plan is to put legend against current star and legend against current star. If both of the legends lose, I get it, and I expect that is what's going to happen, but maybe don't give The Fiend the title in the first place.
We'll touch on, that Fiend versus senior, like you said, the legend versus current star kind of motif they're going with here in just a second, because I do have a question about that. But I want to first talk about some of the ripple effects of this Goldberg win, because I think it was something that no one really saw coming, up to the day of the event. And one of the things that we saw online, or that I saw online, was that the motivation for this decision partly may have been that the WWE wanted to make sure that Roman Reigns would be cheered at WrestleMania, that they didn't want to have a situation like you alluded to where the Fiend would be almost treated as the face in the match with Reigns. They wanted to make Reigns the champion. They want to make him the guy. And they wanted to make sure that he would be cheered at WrestleMania. If that's the case, I don't think that this was the route to go. I don't think that by putting Roman in the ring with Goldberg is a way to get him cheered, because I fear that some fans are going to almost put some of this blame on Roman and say that, hey, you weren't good enough to get cheered against the Fiend, so they put the title on Goldberg to try to make sure, which is the same rap that he's had for years, that he's being shoved down our throats, and they're trying so hard to make the fans love Roman Reigns and make him the guy, that he's almost going to get some residual heat from the crowd from that, because they're going to feel like Roman Reigns is almost the reason that Goldberg beat their beloved Fiend. And so both guys, I could see this becoming like a Reigns-Lesnar situation from WrestleMania 34, or even a Lesnar-Goldberg situation from WrestleMania 20, where the fans are just going to crap all over this main event when they get in the ring at WrestleMania, because they're so upset that the Fiend is not in that position. Am I onto something here? Do you think that that's something that could happen, or do you think that it will play out that the heat is really going to lay with Goldberg, and that the fans will cheer Roman because they just want someone to beat, the elder statesman and take the title off of Goldberg, because he was ultimately the one that, wronged the Fiend in Saudi Arabia?
The part that really started the dominoes falling in this was that nobody expected the Fiend to be this popular. And that stuns me. When I came back to wrestling after a long time out in 2016, I was watching the Battleground pay-per-view of that year. That was the first one I really watched. And Bray Wyatt stood out to me. And Bray Wyatt never stopped standing out to me. I've always been a huge fan of Bray Wyatt. He's so different. He's so unique. And he stands out, and his promos are so good. I always love a talker. It's one of the reasons I love Alexa Bliss and people like that. So how they didn't realize he was going to get cheered is beyond me. But when you look at the opponents they've lined him up against as well, Finn Balor, Seth Rollins when he was still face, Daniel Bryan, The Fiend, and I've mentioned it here so many times, The Fiend was always supposed to be a heel. It was always supposed to be leading to the big heel, The Fiend, against the big face, Roman Reigns. And not for 1 second, not for a single second, did anyone give a damn what they wanted. They were going to cheer The Fiend, and that was that. When you look at the Hell in a Cell finish, if you'd have looked at it as Seth being the face and Bray Wyatt being the heel, I said The Fiend, the heel, it makes a lot more sense in that context. but they needed to adapt. And this is so confusing because with Becky Lynch as a perfect example, she was a heel. She could a heel promo for one night and then they abandoned it. She was wrestling as a heel for 2 pay-per-views and they abandoned it because they knew better. They knew better what was coming. They looked at Kofi Kingston and they said, okay, sorry, Kevin Owens, you can't be in the WrestleMania match anymore. They adapted. With the Fiend, they made no adaptation whatsoever, apart from apparently this decision right here. So there is a domino effect. It will definitely affect Roman, and I do think it is going to be a situation, as you say, where they, and I'll use your term instead of the one that we both know you wanted to say, crapola match. Because that is what they do, and it's such a shame that it comes to Roman Reigns again. I remember that match against Lesnar when the fans hijacked every single second of the match to show their displeasure, which they are entitled to do. If they are unhappy, they are entitled to show that displeasure. It is not fair on Roman. In many ways, it's not fair on Goldberg. Once again, he is just coming in to do as he is told. But we have to question the fact that this match where he won the championship is only 2 matches away from what happened in Saudi Arabia against The Undertaker. He had one match to sort of redeem himself in the fans' eyes, that being the part where he squashed Ziggler, and then squashed Ziggler. It's not enough. He's been rebuilt effectively. And to be quite blunt, it's a real shame the championship isn't on the line between Wyatt and Cena.
Another domino that fell is that there was an apparent pivot for what they were going to do for Elimination Chamber. We talked about on the show just a couple weeks ago that there were advertisements running in the local markets for a Elimination Chamber match for the SmackDown side that you would assume would be for a number 1 contendership for the Universal Championship. It was supposed to pit Roman Reigns, Daniel Bryan, Baron Corbin, Shinsuke Nakamura, Braun Strowman, and Robert Roode, according to the advertisements, would have been in the Elimination Chamber match with the winner, presumably Roman Reigns, going on to WrestleMania to take on The Fiend for the championship. Instead, they do the title switch at Saudi Arabia. That match appears to be scrapped. Now it's going to be replaced with a tag team Elimination Chamber match, which should be a great match. I think all those teams that they've got in there, the Miz and Morrison, the New Day, Heavy Machinery, they're even dusting off, Lucha House Party and throwing them in there. So taking nothing away from what that match will be, you also have 6 guys that look to be in position for a prime spot at Elimination Chamber, and then suddenly that match is gone. They put the title on Goldberg, and then Roman Reigns takes the number 1 contender spot, not in a match, not at the Elimination Chamber, but because he just walks out on SmackDown and basically volunteers himself to be next and challenge Goldberg for the title at WrestleMania. Anything you can tell us about some of the ramification for the fact that this Elimination Chamber match has been switched, and what may be in store for some of the potential combatants, in particular a guy like Daniel Bryan, a main eventer who now doesn't seem to have any type of storyline heading into Elimination Chamber, and nothing that we can really tell even setting up for WrestleMania.
First and foremost, it wasn't just a surprise for the fans, it was also a surprise to some of the wrestlers who were going to be in that match. It wasn't formally announced, but the people who were going to be in that match were aware that it was supposed to be happening and were aware of how they were going to be used. Now you look, a perfect example, as you said, is Daniel Bryan, who now doesn't have a match on the card. Baron Corbin as well has been constantly main eventing SmackDown since it moved across to Fox, and he also doesn't have a match now. Robert Roode was there, but Dolph Ziggler wasn't, because we were looking at Ziggler versus Otis happening at that time, but that seems unlikely to happen now, although they will be involved in the tag team Elimination Chamber, so that could be an interesting side note to that, which should add a bit more to it. So it was a surprise to a lot of the individuals there. I am very much not happy with the way that Roman Reigns just came down and declared himself. I feel that's a little bit disrespectful to the hard work that a lot of other people have done, and I wonder if Braun Strowman had walked down well, would that have completely changed the game plan? We could potentially have seen Braun Strowman versus Roman Reigns again for a shot at Goldberg, or we could have seen Braun Strowman versus Goldberg and then Roman Reigns versus Goldberg. You just miss out on so much There are some advantages. Braun Strowman is now, of course, competing in a match against Nakamura, Zayn and Cesaro, so it gets Zayn and Cesaro back on the card, which is always a good thing. So there are some positives to take from it, but there are also a lot of people who are now not on that card, not just them, but there also seems to be a lot of women not on the card. Where's Bayley? Where's Sasha Banks? Where's Becky Lynch? We may see Becky Lynch involved in the Women's Elimination Chamber, but a very light card. Your top championships aren't there. Goldberg's not there. He's part-time as we know. Brock Lesnar's not there. He's part-time as we know. Where is the Fiend? He could do with picking up another win to really boost his credentials. Hopefully he appears in some capacity, but these last-minute changes have really had a massive impact on Elimination Chamber. A lot of the top stars simply aren't there.
Well, let's talk about, we know what we're getting at WrestleMania now. We know we're getting Roman and Goldberg, and we also know that we're getting The Fiend and Cena. And he talked about the idea of having kind of these, stars of the past meeting these current stars, and that surely the current stars are the guys that are going over. But I got to tell you, I have a really bad feeling in my gut about the Fiend Cena match. I have complete confidence that Roman Reigns is going to go over Goldberg, and almost with the way that the Fiend was booked in Saudi Arabia, and the fact that Goldberg's going to do the job to Roman, Cena's the golden boy. Maybe we don't want to have two of our top guys, and especially top guys in Vince's eyes, which is obvious that Goldberg is one, and then Cena, is like I said, the standard bearer for the company in Vince's eyes, that they're going to have both of those guys go down on the same night. I'm not convinced that the Fiend is going to be set up to win this match with John Cena at WrestleMania. I hope that he does. If he doesn't, I'm afraid for what that means for the character as a whole. But I'm not convinced that the Fiend is going to come out on top in this one. Do you feel like, have confidence that you think that is the direction they're going, that the only reason they're setting him up with a match with John Cena is to put the Fiend over?
Firstly, I think it's interesting that you say there about Goldberg being the big star in Vince's eyes. Vince McMahon originally never wanted to sign Goldberg for anything. He had to be convinced to bring him in from the days after WCW, and he had to be convinced to bring him back. Goldberg's not one that Vince ever really felt an affinity to. But aside from that, from what you're saying about The Fiend and John Cena has gone on record a couple of times, and it's been mentioned to me a couple of times. When it came to the Elimination Chamber match in which Bray Wyatt initially became WWE Champion, John Cena really wanted to be pinned Bray Wyatt. He then wanted his rematch the very next, well, not the next night, sorry, it's 2 nights because it was still on SmackDown, so it was Tuesday nights at the time. He wanted that rematch against Bray Wyatt to once again take the pin. And AJ Styles was added to that match, and Luke Harper attacked Bray Wyatt beforehand to really amp it up. John Cena's one person in that locker room who genuinely does believe in Bray Wyatt. So I'm confident he wanted to come back, as it were, to right a bit of a wrong and help rebuild Bray Wyatt and help build Bray Wyatt. But also John Cena's one of those very smart people who will always be in the ring with the hottest thing there. January last year, he was in a segment and mixed tag match with Becky Lynch because he knew how hot she was. He wants to be involved in that in the same way that The Rock was in October. If you remember, just after John Cena was announced for the SmackDown in which he did challenge Bray Wyatt, I did say that I believed he would challenge Wyatt, but I felt it was going to be for Elimination Chamber. Now, I've gone on record at Sportskeeda and written a report there saying that John Cena has no interest in further world championships. I know the championship's not on the line because it's not with The Fiend anymore, but I think it's interesting that the championship was taken away from The Fiend, because I have absolute confidence that Cena will be taking the loss here. I'm confident he's coming back purely to take the loss, but the fact the championship's not on the line is the only thing giving me that tiny little smidgen of doubt.
Let's kind of fast forward from WrestleMania and do a little bit of fantasy booking here. If the reports online are to be believed, the idea going forward would seem to be that Reigns takes the title at WrestleMania, the Fiend goes over Cena, and then we get the Fiend Roman feud. Let's assume that's the direction they go in, and Roman beats the Fiend. Whether it's, whether they extend it to the next very pay-per-view, maybe they even extend it all the way out to SummerSlam, and that's the main event. Whatever the course of action may be, Reigns beats the Fiend at the end of the feud. Having taken this loss to Goldberg, and then if he does take a loss to Roman, at that point, is the character finished? If Roman Reigns is the guy that ultimately takes down the Fiend again, in the summer or as his first big feud after he takes the title off of Goldberg, and also considering what happened in Saudi Arabia, will there be any coming back for that, for the character, do you think? Or will that be the moment where it's looked at as the Fiend has run its course, he's set up as a victim for the big dog, he put him over, Roman Reigns has overcome the biggest heel character on the brand, and then will it be left up to Bray Wyatt to kind of go reinvent himself yet again?
It's hard to say. There are some stunning parallels between Bray Wyatt and Goldberg, actually. I remember watching the Monday Night War series on the network when I first got it, and there was an interview of Kevin Nash, who is, of course, the person who ended Goldberg's undefeated streak. And he said, if your whole gimmick is that you simply can't be beaten, I'm paraphrasing here, these aren't the exact words. If your whole gimmick is that you can't be beaten, and then you get beaten, well, you need to change your gimmick. Goldberg still hasn't, after all these years, really. He's still that undefeated monster, and he still carries that stigma because he's not the undefeated monster. We go to the Fiend Bray Wyatt. Bray Wyatt was always someone who found it very difficult to pick up wins, and this is a disappointing thing to say, but it is the reality. It's simply, I did an analysis on it back in the day as to his actual win-loss record, and it was something like 32% at the time before the Fiend. It was something like 32% of win record. It wasn't good at all, and people were very upset about that. People were very unhappy. So now he has a gimmick where he's constantly getting wins, he's constantly involved in this and that, he's constantly doing things to really make himself look good and make himself unbeatable. His whole gimmick, his whole section is that he's very difficult to beat. But here we are again. They took him from a point where he couldn't, where it didn't really matter that he wasn't winning, and took him to a point where it really mattered that he couldn't lose. And then they beat him. So he's going to have to go away and reinvent. He always had a shelf life. But if he reinvents and goes back to what he was, we're looking at the exact same thing again. It's just going to rotate and rotate. There's no real winning this at the end of it, unfortunately. This moment was always going to come. He was always going to have to reinvent himself in some way. It just depends where he goes from here. He's a very inventive guy. He could easily come up with something new. But even after everything that's happened with The Fiend, his win-loss record is still only about 40%.
Before we move on to another subject, I want to, and I even told you off air that I haven't talked to you since the Saudi Arabia show, so I feel like I've been holding on to this for a week. I just want to kind of get things off my chest, and you can chime in with your reaction as well. And this is just me speaking just totally as a fan. The WWE can do whatever they want to do. They can book whatever they want to book. I'm not a fan that's going to go on social media and tell people to cancel their WWE network and to, protest WWE, because I'm a fan, and I know that, and just like the people that do that online, they're probably just like me. They're still going to watch. They're not going to cancel their WWE network. They probably watched Raw Monday. They're going to watch SmackDown on Friday because they're a fan. So this is not me, taking a stand against the WWE's product. This is just me simply as a fan watching wrestling and being a fan of storytelling and stories around the matches, because that's really what I fell in love with, as a kid, and for nostalgia's sake, that's what I think of as wrestling, is all the stuff that leads up to the match. The match is almost secondary to the storyline that builds around it. And so when I saw Super Showdown, The Fiend and Goldberg was actually the only match that I saw live. I caught it right as I got home from work. It was coming on, so I was able to catch it live. And I'd seen the reports online that were circulating that day that the WWE had pivoted and that they were going to go with Reigns and Goldberg and then Fiend and Cena at WrestleMania. And I thought, there's no way they're going to do that. They're just putting that out there to throw people off the scent, so that Super Showdown doesn't seem so paint by numbers like it might seem. Then when the match went down, again, looking back at it, it's not that Goldberg beat Fiend, but just that there was no story to it. There was no angle to the match. They just brought Goldberg in because it's Saudi Arabia and they always want to bring in the stars. And, reportedly Saudi Arabia's government has a list of wrestlers they want to see at these shows. And so they're bringing, Goldberg and Hulk Hogan and all these guys over. And so there was no build up to the match. We had been led to believe for months, it had been teased on television that there had to be some type of special way to beat the Fiend, that there had to have been something that someone would have to expose, supernaturally, if you want to call it that, something about him that would have to be exposed to be able to defeat the Fiend. And instead, when he gets defeated, like I said, it's a couple spears, it's a sloppy-looking jackhammer, and Goldberg's the winner. And just all of the air is taken out of the building. All of the air feels like it's taken out of the character. Then you to SmackDown, Goldberg comes out. There's still no story. It's like the match didn't even happen. He comes out. He's the champion. Here comes Roman Reigns. He says he's next. Boom, we've got our WrestleMania match. There's no development between Goldberg and Fiend. And then on top of that, when Cena makes his return, Fiend comes out to challenge him. The Fiend, this crazy psychopath that we've seen for months and months. He carries a lantern that's in the same shape of his own head, for God's sakes. He comes out in full costume with the lights on. We don't get the strobe light. We don't get the weird sound effect and the red lights. He just comes out onto the stage and to challenge Cena, of all the stereotypical things he do, he points at the WrestleMania sign like we have seen countless people do over and over and over again. And here we have the most original character that the WWE has produced in probably the last 10 years. And in the manner that he challenges John Cena for a match at WrestleMania is to come out onto the stage and point at the WrestleMania sign just like everybody else. It blew me away. I mean, I could have forgiven, as a fan, how upset I was to see the Fiend lose the way that he did at Saudi Arabia if there had been some type of payoff storyline-wise, like I said, either with Goldberg, as I said, and then transitioning into the Cena feud. And I know that they haven't had, the Cena feud is just now started. I'm sure it's going to develop, and I get that there's some backstory there that they can build off of. But my gosh, it just as a fan, it really did drain me and really did just kind of suck some of the life out of me between Super Showdown and then on SmackDown to see the way that they then handled the way that they had pivoted away from Reigns and Fiend and then going with the two matches that they're going with. Just, oh my God, it was a very frustrating week, Tom. I have to admit to you, and I feel better now that I've been able to say it out loud, and I appreciate you listening and amusing me, and because I do feel better, and maybe I care too much about this stuff. I know it's just wrestling, and we all do as fans. If you're a fan, I mean it's short for fanatic, so we all probably care too much about wrestling, but man, last week was a tough week. I was very confused and very conflicted. And like I said, now I feel better that I've got off my chest, and I'm looking forward to SmackDown this week.
All right, let me get through my bit because we've taken some time on this, so we're going to have to fly through the rest. Right, when you talk about storytelling, Goldberg's story in its entirety has been he was undefeated once. That's it. That's his whole story. When he was brought into the WWE, he challenged The Rock, and he was Goldberg, that guy who was undefeated once. When he challenged Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 20, he was that guy who was undefeated once. When he came back and he challenged Brock Lesnar at Survivor Series, he would be remiss if he didn't give Brock Lesnar a rematch, because that time he was undefeated, that's Goldberg. That's been his story the whole time. Goldberg doesn't tell stories. Goldberg spears people. It's a very basic thing. He does one or two things very, very well. So they bring him out. He does those one or two things. He does them very, very well. Apart from this time, apparently, the Jackham's great. I haven't seen it. I don't watch Saudi Arabia shows. We've been over this on the podcast before.
You don't need to see it.
I've not been interested in seeing it, I've got to say, from everything I've heard. Now, a situation like that, it's not the end of the world to people. Otherwise, we would never see John Cena again after the massive squash that he got from Brock Lesnar that one time. People can recover as long as it is good storytelling. And The Fiend has that in abundance, or he did. And I've got to say, there was a marked difference in the story of The Fiend the moment he moved over to SmackDown. He started going after old feuds. He only seems to have stories that happened years in the past. He doesn't seem to be interested in telling stories with new, different people. But like the story with The Miz was, I'm going after his family. The story of Daniel Bryan was intricate and detailed, and it was based on things that have happened 5 or 6 years ago. The story we've seen is going to be based on things that have happened 5 or 6 years ago. Finn Balor had that element, but Seth Rollins, it was at least something new and different. But we were heading towards what Roman Reigns, which would have been based on things that happened so long ago. And Bray Wyatt, unfortunately, when it came over to Fox, the character lost a lot of his steam. He started popping up through the ring. He started being a bit more predictable. It was less about attacking people. He was in segments instead of being on TV. And I don't know. He just seems like he's been in rematches. He's been against Daniel Bryan quite a lot. I don't know whether it's just the paucity at the top of SmackDown, the lack of talent that fit the certain roles required to go up against someone like Bray Wyatt. But Bray Wyatt, for me, has always been one of those, much like a Finn Balor, that, the Demon King, as it were. He needs an ideal opponent, and he's run out. It's when you build a character like that, he needs ideal opponents, and he's run out. If they were going to do this, surely it would have been better to put him against The Undertaker, because they've at least got some history. I don't know. The pivot was made. We are where we are now. Hopefully Bray Wyatt is able to regain his momentum soon enough. Hopefully we get a good match between Goldberg and Roman. I actually really enjoyed the WrestleMania match between Goldberg and Lesnar, because it was, 10 minutes of pure coach TV, and I like that. So if we can get more of that, that'd be great. But it's Roman Reigns. That's not his style. We will have to see what happens. It's knocked my confidence a bit in the character, but I'm still a massive Bray Wyatt fan, and I look forward to seeing what comes next.
Let's move on to Raw this past Monday. Get your reaction to a couple of key developments on that show. First of all, talk about the new Raw Team Champions, the Street Profits. They win the titles from Seth Rollins and Buddy Murphy. We talked on the show a little bit earlier, maybe a week or two ago, about the fact that we thought that Rollins and Murphy probably weren't long to have the tag titles because of the fact that Rollins will probably be moved into a singles feud with Kevin Owens and probably wouldn't be able to do that while also carrying the tag team titles and giving the tag titles a storyline going into WrestleMania. So the Street Profits are the ones to take it off of them. It was a really good match. The crowd seemed super into it and and definitely popped big when the Street Profits won. I got to admit, I didn't really get the now or never stipulation because it wasn't like the Street Profits had a bunch of opportunities at the tag titles and had come up short. So I didn't really get the now or never stipulation, other than maybe to tip off viewers that a title change was probably going to happen, because when you hear of stipulations like it's the last championship match or no rematch, usually there's a good chance that you're going to see a title switch. So maybe that was the motivation behind it. But regardless, like I said, good match, good crowd reaction. Street Profits are the new Raw Tag Team Champions, and probably look to carry the titles into WrestleMania. And you've got teams like AOP, like the Viking Raiders, in the mix. What did you think about the Street Profits taking the straps here, and what do you see their possible matchups or their road to WrestleMania being like?
I was very surprised when the Viking Raiders initially lost the titles, because I just didn't feel that Seth Rollins Championship. It has, however, done very good things for Buddy Murphy, so I can kind of see where they're coming from there. The stipulation, the now or never, was definitely an attempt to draw viewers in and make believe that a title change was coming, which effectively it was. It's much like Chris Jericho saying he would defend the AEW Championship if he lost to Tanahashi at New Japan, at Wrestle Kingdom. So it's just a way to add a bit more stakes and making it look a bit less predictable. Fair enough. I get what they were going for. It worked on me, gotta say. I was watching it live and it just added a bit more spice to it because I still wasn't entirely sure that Street Profits were going to win. They did. It's not long since they've been drafted across from NXT, so it's pretty quick for them. And it also means we might get a bit more focus on the tag division because both sides, both different brands, and in fact to a degree NXT at the moment, the tag team divisions are particularly weak. Even though they've got a lot of talent across the board in those divisions, they're just not getting the exposure they need. So this will get it back into that, and it looks like at WrestleMania, where the initial plan was to be Viking Raiders versus Authors of Pain, it looks like we'll now get that match, but with the Street Profits as well, because I think we're all confident now, Seth Rollins will be facing Kevin Owens at WrestleMania, as has been in the works for a number of months now.
A match we know that we're getting at WrestleMania will be Brock Lesnar defending the WWE Championship against Drew McIntyre. And, just the other week we were talking about the fact that maybe Drew McIntyre had lost a little bit of momentum since the Royal Rumble heading into WrestleMania. But if that was the case, boy, did he seem to get it all back and then some with this segment with Brock Lesnar on Monday.
It's just for evidence that WWE officials listen to our podcast.
Of course, obviously.
Because I do believe, and I stand by it, that he was losing momentum. The feud of MVP seemed very much like a placeholder, and it wasn't doing anything for him, in my mind. However, I completely agree. Now that Saudi Arabia is out of the way and Brock Lesnar has retained the championship, he now puts himself directly into the path of Drew McIntyre and Drew McIntyre alone. So they have ramped it up. And it was beautiful to see. A lot of people on Reddit have been able to spot that Brock Lesnar was communicating to Drew McIntyre to go and get the championship, pick it up, really show it off. And after the initial Claymore in the ring, I really wanted to see that, was hoping that we would see it. But then, of course, he feigned leaving before coming back, so I thought we weren't going to get it. That visual, Drew McIntyre holding the WWE Championship, that's something they can go back to in future. Much like at Extreme Rules, the tag match where Drew appeared behind The Undertaker. That's something they could go back to in future, and I still want to see that feud. In addition to that, when you hear the crowd start chanting one more time, Brock Lesnar heard it, Brock Lesnar got up. He showed for it. Brock Lesnar is doing everything he can to put Drew McIntyre over, and he's been doing that since the Royal Rumble match. Brock is really invested in this, and it's great to see. It really shows the amount of respect between the two men, and it really shows how good a match we're going to get.
Yeah, I know Brock gets a lot of flack online for, working the limited schedule and not being around to defend the title much and all that, but I really do think that he is underrated and doesn't get enough credit for just what you were speaking to about the way that he puts guys over. He wants to get guys over when he believes in a guy and thinks it's the right guy to put over. He works hard to get him over and really is very giving of himself and his character to really push that match. And I think that the match with Drew McIntyre at WrestleMania is a prime example that he believes in a guy like Drew McIntyre, and he's going to do everything he can to make sure that if they do put the strap on him at Mania, that he sets him off on the best foot forward that he can, and he does his part to make sure that this is the guy, and when he's anointed as the champion, he's going to be sent off with, the rocket strapped to his back.
I would imagine so. There'll be some way they really celebrate his experience and everything he has given to the company, so I'd imagine something like that. It's one of those situations where it's going to be a match between two people who've really given a lot, and Drew McIntyre, since he returned, has really given a lot. So it's people at very much different ends of the spectrum, but who went away, really honed their craft, and came back. There are a lot of parallels between the two. Brock Lesnar, when he eventually retires, will have a massive send-off, make no mistake, but he will have paved paved the way for the future. In things like his matches with Braun Strowman, even though I don't particularly rate them that highly myself, he really drew a lot of eyes to Braun Strowman. The matches with Roman Reigns, I feel, have been very good, even though they maybe were unexpected in the ways that some of them finished. His 3 matches with Roman, there's only the one at SummerSlam where he took the spear and took the quick loss of the Universal Championship. That's the only one where you can really expect that finish. Seth Rollins cashing in, can't expect that. And of course, Brock Lesnar winning after a year of building towards Roman winning definitely was unexpected. So Brock's given a lot, and it looks like he's going to give a lot to Drew.
Prior to Raw, I know that you were definitely hyped about the match announcement of AJ Styles against Aleister Black.
This was so brutal.
Yeah, and that wasn't exactly what we got. We got kind of the gauntlet with the OC, so we didn't really get the straight up. We did get Styles versus Black, but it was after he'd already run through Gallows and Anderson. And then also we get the tease at the end of AJ Styles doing the Undertaker pin, the arms crossed on Aleister Black to get the pin, which would seem to hint that would be a feud that is going to go forward. We saw what happened at the Saudi Arabia show with the Undertaker coming back and defeating AJ Styles in the gauntlet match, and then AJ kind of continuing that this past Monday. If that's a match we're going to get, and we feel like if it's Styles-Taker, really, I have 2 questions to ask you. One, any chance at all that Aleister Black is somehow weaved into this storyline? Maybe we even possibly get, would a triple threat be out of the question between Styles, Black, and Undertaker at WrestleMania?
I would say a triple threat would be out of the question, because triple threats require a lot of extra athleticism, and it would just end up being in a situation whereby Black and Styles are doing all the wrestling and the Undertaker's put through a table outside or something. You can still get a good match like that, but I feel with the way they're building it, Aleister Black is very much a temporary bump in the road. And I feel that's a real shame, because this match wasn't about Aleister Black. Aleister after fought in this. You could have put someone else in this spot and it would have been just as effective, but it wouldn't have harmed Aleister Black. Now, it took 3 men to take him down, and there was a couple of beatdowns as well, so it's not the most harmful way to use Aleister Black, but if you could put someone else, like a Ricochet, perfect example there, who beats 2 men, already had a storyline going with the club, and then eventually is taken down on the 3rd, there's someone who could benefit from being in this spot instead of losing out by being. It still seems like AJ Styles is being protected in ring. He's not actually competing all that much. So it may be something as simple as that, but they are competing, of course, at Elimination Chamber. So hopefully they don't do it again, and I might actually get to watch Aleister Black against AJ Styles like I really want to watch, because it just should be a great match. Hopefully I'm just able to watch it. But who knows? You never can tell with the WWE at the moment.
Now, on the subject of The Undertaker, if the plan is for Undertaker AJ Styles at WrestleMania, and I can't believe that this is really coming out of my mouth, but The Undertaker on Twitter this week actually sent out a tweet that he was maybe a little bit displeased with the way that the WWE apparently overlooked his wife, Michelle McCool. They put out a list of the top 45 women's wrestlers, or I believe maybe even women's title holders in WWE history, and McCool was not on that list. Now, they have since updated that list, they being WWE.com, have updated that list to add McCool and a couple others as well. But The Undertaker put out a tweet to that list from WWE saying, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially too little, too late, and really seemed to be displeased with the way that he perceived his wife being a little bit, disrespected and overlooked. I know Undertaker is a businessman, and I know that he is a company guy. But any way that some of this displeasure or maybe some ill feelings with him toward WWE about this, Twitter beef could have any effect whatsoever on the fact that he participates in WrestleMania?
None whatsoever. Undertaker, when he signs his contract, when he starts working out, he will still be there. He'll still be involved in the match. He's had issues before, but when it comes to out there in the ring, he will always be there to deliver. That's just the way the Undertaker works. What I would like to say, just as an aside before we move on, if you remember when they first announced Undertaker versus AJ Styles for WrestleMania, I did mention that I really would have rather seen Styles versus Black instead. I think it's a shame that they are using the Undertaker in this way, because I don't feel that these two men are going to have that much chemistry and be able to deliver something that is fitting for the modern wrestling world. And the Undertaker, sure, he can compete, and sure, he's a big name, but I've gone on record before as saying that the spectacle for me is a little bit diminished. I'm hoping I'm proved wrong. I always am willing to give people a chance, and he may put on the best match of the night at WrestleMania, but he'll definitely be there. He will definitely do everything he can in that match to make a huge spectacle of it and to really entertain the fans. And no matter what is happening outside, I think we all can agree that the strangest thing in the goddamn world is when The Undertaker is on Twitter.
Isn't that the truth? Like I said, I can't believe we live in a world where the dead man is sending out tweets on social media.
Yep. The dead man rose to pick up a mobile phone and send a tweet because he was annoyed at the WWE. That's so living.
That it is. It's the crazy world of professional wrestling right now. Last thing I want to talk about from Raw is, and you mentioned him earlier when speaking about the spot that AJ Styles was in, was one Ricochet. Ricochet, he does the honors for Brock Lesnar at Saudi Arabia, again in a match that a lot of people seem to not be particularly happy with, just as far as the way that the match occurred and the light that it put Ricochet in. What maybe would like to seem to be a little bit more competitive, so he does the job for Lesnar at Saudi Arabia. Then he shows up on Raw on Monday, and he gets pinned by Riddick Moss in a 24/7 championship match. And there's video line on Twitter, and if you search for it, if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you can find it, of Ricochet heading to the back. It's obviously after Raw's already either gone to commercial or gone to a backstage segment. And so, it's dark, and he's heading towards the back and kind of waves to the fans. But as he's kind of turning the corner, he looks very frustrated. He rips off his wrist tape and looks very frustrated as he turns the corner and heads back to the curtain. A lot of people have taken this as a sign that maybe he is frustrated with his current position, the company, doing the job at Saudi Arabia and then having to turn around and go down to Riddick Moss, who's a relative newcomer and dare I know he's the 24/7 champion, but really a relative unknown at this point in the company. And even, we asked for fan interaction and fan questions here on the podcast, and Rick Ucchino, who you can actually hear over on ESPN 1530 in Cincinnati, so we appreciate him chiming in here on the podcast this week, but he actually tweeted us and asked the question, is Ricochet really being buried, and why does Vince have no clue what to do with the bevy of talent at his disposal? Is Ricochet a victim of the classic tear them down to build them back up? Is it a case that they really don't know what to do with him at this point? What can you tell us about Ricochet's current position in the company, where he stands on the card, and is there any validity to the fact that he may be personally feeling a little bit of frustration with the way he's being used right now?
There's a lot of play here, and there are a lot of different variables. When it came to the match against Lesnar, I would never consider that a burial. You're in a match against Brock Lesnar, you're in a WWE Championship, and I mentioned John Cena earlier getting squashed and managing to recover. That was fine for me. You'll see quite a lot of the matches in Saudi Arabia were quite short. A lot of that was down to the temperature and the weather there and how they wanted to keep things moderately short, keep it all tidy, especially when you have like gauntlet matches and so on and so forth. When it came to Monday Night Raw with Riddick Moss, they have a habit of doubling down. So if you're on a down, they push you a little bit further down. And there's two reasons for that. Firstly, you're on a down, so it's not going to affect you that much. And secondly, it'll engender quite a lot of additional fan support. because, everyone likes an underdog, and if you're on a losing streak, people start to get behind you. However, it was still an awkward way to do it, and it's a difficult position to be in. Ricochet is one of those. It could be kayfabe when it comes to the frustration. However, he is an openly emotional person. There are many times we've seen him in tears celebrating Casey Catanzaro in the Royal Rumble. There was a backstage segment there where he was in tears. He was so proud. And in addition, when he was called up, at the time it was still called up, and he had his last match at a takeover before WrestleMania, and he was openly crying then. He's an emotional person, and that's a good thing. It's a good example of, you don't have to be this hyper-masculinity all the time. So I like that. But in situations like this, it does mean he's quite open with his frustrations. He ends up being told, okay, you're winning the United States Championship at WrestleMania. Then it's not a burial. He may just not know that yet. Or it may be a situation that we heard a lot of stories when Paul Heyman first came in that Ricochet was going to be the next guy who's pushed to the top. That hasn't really happened. I don't know about the validity of those stories, but Ricochet is still very new to the main roster. He's still moderately new to the company, even though he's got a lot of wrestling experience. So it could just be that we need to be a little patient, and so does he.
Well, one guy who his patience has seemed to run out is Matt Hardy. And it was announced that he is officially done with the WWE. His contract expired and was not renewed. According to Matt, it seemed to basically stem on creative differences. He wanted to have a larger say in his character and in the creative development of his character and the direction that he was going. It appears that the WWE was not necessarily acquiescing to that request, and so he's decided to move on. What do you see as the next move for Matt Hardy? Obviously, his legacy in the business is cemented. If he wanted to go and just be a family man for the rest of his days, no one would have any argument about what he's done for the wrestling business. But it seems like that's probably not his style and probably not what he's going to elect to do. A lot of rumors running around that he's going to end up in AEW. His YouTube series, he just recently, if you caught the latest episode, the Young Bucks actually appeared on his Free the Delete series. So obviously upcharging the rumors that he's going to appear in AEW sooner rather than later. You talked to us last week that there was even an option for him to go to NXT, possibly as a backstage agent or producer. Seems like maybe he declined that offer. What do you see as the next move for Matt Hardy going forward now that he is officially free and from the WWE and able to kind of do what he pleases?
Well, the WWE offered him a range of options and simply none of them appealed to him. And I think it's quite telling. Matt Hardy engages with quite a few of my tweets. He's spoken every now and then. And it's telling that the tweets he engages with are the ones that are creative. So a couple of weeks ago, I put out an idea that he would move to NXT and he would make a tag team called Broken Dreams with Velveteen Dream. And he connected on that. And today I write something about not needing to be the exalted one in AEW because he can put his talents to a different variety of things, and he engages with that. The creative things he engages with. When it comes to the WWE, there is only one person in the company who has full creative control. There will only ever be one person in the company who has full creative control. I suspect in 100 years, well after the time when there is no Vince McMahon will still have full creative control of the WWE. That's how it seems to be there. That's how it's always going to be. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you have one person with that vision, that's how the WWE made it to where it is. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but for Matt Hardy, it doesn't work. The Young Bucks did appear on the Free the Delete series. That now seems a dead cert that he will be going to AEW, where there are a number of things he can do. I don't necessarily believe he will be the exalted one in question, but it's a very strong get. He has a world of experience. He can still wrestle and still wrestle. Pardon me. He can still wrestle and still wrestle well. So he can still add a lot to it. And he has that wealth of knowledge and that wealth of experience and that real drawing power that comes with being different and being unique. He can really create a niche for himself there. And I do feel that's where he's going. I've been confident for a while that he's not going to re-sign with the WWE. And AEW simply are the ones that made all the running. He's listened to a number of offers. This seems to be the one that is most appealing. I wish him the best of luck.
How big would it be for AEW, or what type of impact do you think it would have? And again, this is just me just kind of fantasy booking here, but let's say within the next 6 months, AEW ends up with Harper, Matt Hardy, and Rusev. What type of impact do you think that would have on the AEW brand to get 3 guys like that? Very different, varying in ages, varying in experience, very different characters, but obviously household names and guys that had pretty big runs in the WWE. And all 3 are guys that look like AEW has very high potential to actually end up with on their roster in the next couple of months.
The 3 men you're talking about are the powerful draws. In the same way that Jericho, Moxley, and Cody are very strong draws, particularly with an American audience. But they also bring a lot more. Matt Hardy has a very dedicated fan base. Rusev has an international appeal. Harper has a lot of indie fans who've stuck with him for a long time and want to see him do well. They all bring different things to the table and very different personalities. AEW right now are presenting an extremely strong product without these 3 men. What's happening is, what they didn't have before was drawing power. When they first announced it, Chris Jericho was really their only draw of international audience. They added Moxley. They've added a few more, Hager, for example, and they're growing. And not only that, they have done very well developing the talent they've got. Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, just to name a few. MJF is doing great things. Orange Cassidy. So if you add 3 proven draws like that, it will strengthen their numbers. It simply will. There's no escaping that. It will get them more people watching, get them higher ratings. I'm not sure how long they'll be able to sustain the ratings, because ratings as a rule are going down and down and down at the moment. But they don't need that high ratings. As long as they're going upwards, they'll be happy. This could really change the game, because you've got 3 immediate potential main eventers who aren't going to want to be main eventers per se. Matt Hardy doesn't need to be in the main event. He wants to do what he wants to do. He doesn't care about where it is on the card. He just wants to do what he wants to do. And I would say much the same of Rusev.
Be very interesting to see what happens if we get some new faces on AEW, and if they're given the chance, maybe WWE will be, themselves for maybe not giving those guys a better chance and a better run when they had them, or maybe not offering them a better contract, whatever the case may be. But it'll be interesting to see how that develops moving forward. We appreciate everybody sticking with us on this extended edition of Dropkick DiSKussions, presented by Sportskeeda right here on the Sportskeeda YouTube channel. Make sure you're giving us a subscription. Make sure you're liking, sharing, commenting on the video. Tell your friends about us, and make sure that they know that if they want to be in the know every week about what's going on in the world of wrestling, that they need to get all their information right here from Tom on Dropkick DiSKussions. Make sure that you're following Tom on Twitter at Colohue. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Korey Gunz. You can also check out Tom on YouTube, on his personal YouTube channel as well, where he puts up daily and weekly videos talking about topics that range even more so from what we talk about here on the podcast. He's got a wealth of information, and he keeps you guys up to date there on his personal YouTube channel as well. And then check out all of his great articles, as well as others, over on Sportskeeda.com. We appreciate you all joining us this week. Enjoy Elimination Chamber this Sunday, and we will see you guys next time on Dropkick DiSKussions, presented by Sportskeeda.